My name is Leah Harrison, and I am 25 years old. If someone had told me that the happiest moment of my young career would collide with the most devastating moment of my family life, I would have laughed in disbelief. But that was before the day I returned home from my first successful business trip, expecting hugs and warmth, only to find my life stuffed into black garbage bags on the front lawn. They were lined up like silent monuments, heavy and swollen with my belongings, clothes I had carefully folded, books I had collected since high school, the souvenirs from college that I thought I'd keep forever. The sight stole my breath. My homecoming looked less like a return and more like a funeral for the life I thought I had here. And then I saw her, my mother, standing at the gate with arms folded, her jaw set in that hard line I knew too well. My 3 siblings flanked her like soldiers ready for battle. Their faces were unreadable, except for the faintest glimmer of disdain in their eyes. They were united, all of them, and I was the outsider. The smile I had worn since landing at O'Hare vanished. My suitcase slipped from my hand, thudding onto the pavement. Before I could ask, before I could even begin to process what was happening, Mom's voice cut through the silence. "You are 25 now," she said coldly, as if rehearsed. "It's time for you to get out." Those words struck deeper than any physical blow. They were final, sharp, merciless. But before I take you further into that moment, let me step back and tell you where this all began, because you cannot understand betrayal unless you know the history that came before it. Growing up as the youngest of 4 in our suburban Chicago home was never simple. My father died when I was just 7 years old, and though my siblings had vivid memories of him, his laugh, his voice, the way he guided them, I had only blurred fragments and photographs, a face in a frame, a voice I could no longer summon. After Dad's passing, Mom changed. Sandra Harrison was once warm and lively, a woman who threw backyard barbecues and told bedtime stories with voices that made us giggle. But grief hardened her, and the strain of single parenthood sharpened her edges until she became a different person altogether. She worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat and never let us forget it. "I gave up everything for you kids," she would remind us at every opportunity. And then came the unspoken bargain. Her sacrifices demanded our obedience, our achievements, our lives molded to fit her vision of success. My siblings delivered. Jackson, the eldest, went on to become a surgeon. Natalie pursued law and rose quickly through the corporate ranks. Kevin became an engineer with a corner office and a predictable future. They all married partners my mother approved of, bought homes she could boast about, and gave her grandchildren right on schedule. To her, they were trophies, proof that her sacrifices had not been in vain. And then there was me. I had chosen marketing instead of medicine, creativity instead of structure, a startup instead of a safe corporate path. I wasn't married, I didn't own property, I didn't tick the boxes she demanded, I wasn't rebellious by most standards, but in her eyes, I was the disappointment, the black sheep. "When will you get a real job, Leah?" she would ask during Sunday dinners, her words sharp enough to slice through the roast on the table. At your age, Natalie was already making 6 figures. Still, after graduation, I moved back home. At first it made sense. Chicago rent was sky high, and my entry-level salary barely covered the basics. Mom had welcomed me back with words that sounded generous: "Stay as long as you need. Family supports family." But her version of support had strings attached. I paid rent, stocked the fridge, handled chores, chauffeured her to appointments, and acted as her emotional punching bag when she needed to vent. My presence was less that of a daughter and more of a live-in assistant. My siblings reinforced the imbalance. To them, I was always the baby, the one who didn't know enough to be taken seriously. Whenever I dared to voice an opinion during family disputes, they brushed me aside. "You'll understand when you've lived more," Jackson would say, ignoring the fact that my college years had taught me independence in ways his sheltered life never could. By 25, the weight of it all was suffocating. Friends my age were living in apartments, traveling, building lives free from constant scrutiny. Meanwhile, I was still explaining my whereabouts to a mother who texted me past midnight demanding to know when I would be home. Then, at last, came an opportunity one thought might shift everything. Our small marketing firm landed a massive client, the kind of account that could launch careers, and to my shock, I was chosen to present our campaign in New York. It was a test, a chance to prove myself not only to my boss but, if I was honest, to my family. I prepared obsessively, rehearsing my pitch until I could deliver it backward in my sleep. The night before my flight, I sat at the dinner table, buzzing with nervous excitement. I wanted my mother's encouragement, some acknowledgement of the milestone I was about to face. Instead, she scrolled through her phone, barely glancing at me. "I'll be back late Friday night," I told her, my voice hopeful. "Fine," she replied flatly. "Jack and Natalie are coming with the kids Saturday, be here to help." Her indifference burned. I swallowed my disappointment and forced a smile, clinging to the hope that once I succeeded, everything would change. And succeed I did. The New York presentation was a triumph. The clients loved my ideas, requesting only minor tweaks before approving a multi-million-dollar campaign. My boss, glowing with pride, took me to dinner afterward, over wine and pasta. He said words I had been desperate to hear for years. "You have real talent, Leah. I see a bright future for you here." I carried those words like a treasure. For once, someone saw me, someone believed in me. On my way home, I bought gifts for each family member, a silk scarf for Mom, craft beers for my brothers, a designer pen for Natalie, small tokens, gestures of love, maybe even bribes for acceptance. I flew back to Chicago imagining the smiles, the congratulations, the pride I had always longed to see reflected in my mother's eyes. I pictured telling them about the client's praise, about the possibility of promotion. In those daydreams, my siblings were finally impressed, and my mother finally proud. But those daydreams shattered the moment I stepped out of the cab and saw my possessions lined up in black garbage bags. Instead of pride, I was met with exile. Instead of love, I was handed betrayal. That day was the end of the life I thought I knew, and the beginning of something I never expected. "Promoted," I said, my voice trembling somewhere between triumph and disbelief. "I brought gifts for all of you to celebrate." I held up the small shopping bags like offerings at an altar, my heart foolishly hoping that maybe, just maybe, they would soften, that they would see me, not as the family disappointment, not as the burden they whispered about when they thought I wasn't listening, but as someone worthy of respect. The silence that followed was suffocating. My mother's expression didn't change. Jackson shifted his weight and looked away. Natalie tapped her nails against her crossed arms, her mouth twisting in disdain. Kevin's eyes darted to mine, softer than the rest, but still filled with hesitation. I laughed, the sound hollow in the cold night air. "I actually thought you would be proud of me." My laugh broke into a whisper. "How naive of me." Kevin stepped forward. "Leah," he began, his voice low, carrying a trace of regret. But I raised my hand sharply, cutting him off. "No, don't. You've all made your position clear. I won't stay where I'm not wanted, or valued." For the first time in years, I felt strangely calm. A current of clarity surged through me, washing away the desperate need for their approval. They expected me to break, to beg, to cling to the scraps of belonging they dangled. Instead, I surprised them all, and myself, by smiling. It wasn't a smile of joy but of release, of sudden weightlessness that comes only when you have nothing left to lose. "Goodbye," I said, my voice firm and steady. I opened the car door, the keys shaking only slightly in my hand. "I hope the money is worth it." I slid behind the wheel before they could answer. My siblings stood frozen on the porch. My mother's silhouette, arms still crossed, loomed in the glow of the porch light like a sentinel guarding her kingdom. For once, I didn't try to read their faces. I didn't wait for second thoughts or apologies. I drove. Tears blurred the road as I navigated streets I had known my entire life, streets that suddenly felt foreign, stripped of comfort and filled with memories that now cut like glass. My phone buzzed again and again on the passenger seat, lighting up with their names, but I didn't look. I couldn't. I had no plan, no destination, just the sharp ache of being cast out and the desperate need for a lifeline. And so, I dialed the only person I trusted completely, my college roommate, Zoe. Her voice, warm and steady, cracked through my sobs. "Leah, what's wrong?" Between choking breaths, I poured it out, the garbage bags, the words, the betrayal. Without hesitation, she said, "Come here, right now. You can stay as long as you need." Zoe lived half an hour away in a modest apartment she shared with her boyfriend, Tyler. When I pulled up, exhausted and numb, they were already waiting outside. Neither asked for explanations. They simply opened the trunk, lifted the bulging garbage bags, and carried the broken pieces of my life into their home. They didn't treat me like baggage, they treated me like a person. That first night was the lowest point. I curled on the unfamiliar bed in their spare room, surrounded by my things stuffed into plastic sacks. I couldn't bring myself to open them. To unpack felt like admitting permanence, like conceding that my family's rejection was final. My phone buzzed endlessly on the nightstand. Zoe finally sat beside me and urged me to read the messages. I did, reluctantly. They were exactly what I expected. "Mom, you're being dramatic. You know this is for your own good. Jackson, you need to grow up and take responsibility. Natalie, here are some apartment listings, all of them laughably beyond my budget. Kevin, I don't agree with how it was done, but Mom's right, it's time." I set the phone down, my chest hollow. Zoe shook her head. "These people are toxic," she said firmly, her voice sharp with protective anger. "They're still my family," I whispered, my voice breaking on the word family. "Family doesn't treat each other like this," Tyler said from the doorway. His tone was matter-of-fact, not cruel, but it landed with unexpected force. "What they did to you, that's emotional abuse." The word stunned me. Abuse. It felt too heavy, too extreme, but then again, was it? The garbage bags, the cold faces, the calculated humiliation, what else could it be? For the first time, I saw my situation not through the lens of guilt or obligation, but through the eyes of people who loved me without condition. Their clarity pierced the fog my family had woven around me for years. It wasn't normal. It wasn't my fault. And most importantly, it wasn't something I had to accept. That night, lying awake in the early hours of morning, I made two decisions. First, I would build a life entirely independent of them, not $1 of theirs, not 1 ounce of permission or validation. Second, I would never again measure my worth through their approval. The ache in my chest didn't vanish, but beneath it, something new stirred, a spark, a fragile sense of possibility that hadn't existed before. For the first time in my adult life, I was free. Free to rise. Free to define myself on my own terms. Free to finally belong to myself. And though I didn't know it yet, that night of tears and garbage bags would become the beginning of the strongest chapter of my life.